people who grew up in families with money kind of know how the money game works. There is a certain subset of career paths, networks to tap into, opportunities to go after, where if you play the game right, you'll make very high six figures to low seven figures. But you have to know what that game, it's a little bit exclusive. You need to know from middle school or high school which colleges to optimize for, which internships to optimize for. Once you go in the investment banking or consulting route, like how to play that to get the next promotion, or do you jump to a private equity job, or do you go back to business school? There's just this whole internal knowledge that if you're from that world, you just know that's what you're supposed to do. And if you're not, you don't. And the other thing is that like I noticed this especially in business school, if you are from the poor family and you manage to get in the good grad school, you have to go after the banking job or the consulting job because you need to take the guaranteed relatively high salary to pay back your student loans. You can't go try the startup. You can't join the tech startup. You can't start a business because you will owe $150,000 that you have to pay back, and your family's not going to be able to cover that for you. You just can't really deviate versus the kids who grew up with some money. Maybe they did the banking thing initially, but if they're 26, 27 and want to try something new and they have a $10 million plus nest egg, right? They can do whatever they want.
What's up, folks? We have the author of Young Money, Jack Rains. We're going to have a fascinating conversation where we talk about his upbringing. For a lot of you folks who have kids growing up in this era, I don't know what we call them these days, not millennials, but Gen Zs, Alphas, whatever. I think it'd be a great podcast to listen to gain a little understanding about what they're coming up in, especially those of them with money, which you'll hear Jack's story of how he came up from a somewhat well-to-do family, entrepreneur family, and moving through his career path amongst a lot of competition in New York City, elsewhere in a lot of these more business, private equity, venture capital world. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoy the show. A lot of people in their 30s and even 40s and 50s especially don't really understand what kids go through these days. And one little anecdote before, like, I was having a conversation with an investor the other day and them saying, yeah, I don't know why these kids are going to rent all these houses. It's like, no, they don't want to own those old 1980 house. They want something newer and they don't mind it being under 1,000 square feet. And then finally the epiphany hit, but it's just different generations at this time. All right, welcome, Jack. Welcome to the podcast. I know your profile is very similar to a lot of our clients' kids, right? A lot of the kids go to prestigious colleges, doctor, lawyer, engineers,
Yeah.
etc. Not all of them want to do that, but a lot of them are going to be given money and they go out to maybe the big city. Take us back to your upbringing. What kind of family did you grow up with, and what was like the money mindsets? And then, yeah, let's walk to where we're at these days. And
As someone who's sitting in my, I think, 500 square foot studio in New York, I can totally relate to that. But I guess to start a little bit with my backstory, I'm Jack, 29. I work for a venture capital fund called Slow Ventures. Went to business school at Columbia, got my MBA there. Lived in New York for most of the last 4 years and did 1 year in San Francisco. But originally, I'm from South Georgia, small town, middle of nowhere. I joke, like I have a cowboy hat on my profile picture on like all my social medias and stuff. But yeah, I'm a Southern guy. Played football in college at Mercer University, studied finance and Spanish. And it's very funny going from literal small town USA to then spending, call it most of my adult life now in either New York or Silicon Valley, because the norms of what people do for their careers, what seems like a lot of money and not a lot of money, it's just like night and day, right? I grew up, my dad used to be a lawyer. Him and his brother they're like entrepreneurs and they own a bunch of businesses. They own 15 furniture stores and five car dealerships. So call it 20 random stores. Mom's an interior designer, yada, yada, yada. As a kid, I kind of thought that I was going to grow up and sell insurance or be a commercial real estate broker or just do something in that realm of things in Atlanta, Nashville, or Charlotte after college. And then once I was in sophomore, junior year of college, I realized I wanted to do the New York thing or the San Francisco thing and applied to business school. I got into business school at Columbia and they had a deferred enrollment option where you can apply to business school as a senior in college. If you get in, you work 2 to 5 years and then you go back to school. For any college kids or like parents of college kids whose kids might want to do an MBA, deferred enrollment is sick. It's very cool getting into grad school like pre out of undergrad, like studying from the GMAT when you're 20 or 21 is much better than doing it at 25 and you're working 60 hours a week. But yeah, my My goal at the time was like, I want to get out of the Southeast. I want to go to New York. I'll go to Columbia and probably be either an investment banker or a consultant and then figure out my life after that. That's not at all how my career ended up turning out over the last 4 years. I can hit the entire, do you want the speed run of undergrad to how I ended up where I'm at today?
Yeah, let me pause there. So, I mean, for
Yeah.
folks listening, we talk a lot about first gen, second gen, third gen money. I think maybe you're categorizing yourself as more second gen money here.
Yeah.
So I guess the definition, at least how we like to use, is the first gen is the one has multi-millions, right? Like
Yep.
everybody these days owns your house in Hawaii or California. You're a millionaire, but that's
Yep.
not that great, right? To be a multi-millionaire, you have to judiciously save and invest, or like your parents own being an entrepreneur. But
Yep.
maybe breaking that down further, any other siblings in there too? Just
Yeah, the whole mix, like all my grandparents are still alive. Grandparents, at least on my dad's side, were entrepreneurs. I have a sister who's I'm 29. I have a sister who's 24, who she lives in Birmingham, Alabama, went to the University of Georgia. Grandpa started his own insurance company. Grandma used to run her own stores. She was the chairman of a bank in South Georgia. Dad runs his own business. Mom runs her own business. Like everybody in my family has been fairly entrepreneurial the whole time. So my kind of like frame of reference was never go down track and do this for 20 years and make partner at your bank or consulting firm or law firm. It was like my dad was a lawyer for a little while and hated it and did his own thing. Everybody's always really been scratching the entrepreneurial itch in my family.
yeah. And but yet they sent you to college and down that traditional path.
Yeah.
What was always the sentiment of it? Hey, go Jack, go try this out, get as smart as you can, get some technical skills, but eventually we got off that path ourselves. But what do you think their goal in doing all this was, or maybe even at this point?
Yeah, I think the core thing that's going back to my grandparents, parents, and now me was always get a good education, be educated. You should have high agency over what you do with your life, but be thoughtful about how you go about it. And like education is probably the highest leverage thing a young person can do. And I also extend that to going to a top school or having one or two jobs at like top well-known companies. If I could do it again, if I'd gone to a better undergrad and could have recruited for investment banking out of undergrad, I probably would have done that, right? My dad does his own thing now, but he went to Davidson College and then he went to law school and he practiced law for 5 years. I am the thing that I was taught, which I strongly believe, is that capturing a couple of, call it prestige stamps early in your life, just make everything else that much easier. If you want to go raise your own fund, start your own business, whatever, having a network from being at very powerful schools and early jobs where you're with peers that are going to achieve big things, it just makes it so much easier to do everything later. Opportunities come to you much easier. So the thing was always like I was never pushed in any particular career, but like the value of education was like it was very clear to me from the time I was like 10, like you're smart, make good grades, like you have a good brain, leverage it, yada yada yada, and then kind of figure out what you want to do along the way.
Was that bridge there to come back and work with the family business there, or not quite for yours?
Like it could have been, to tell you the truth, but like I just don't love being in the Southeast. I'm a New York guy through and through. I would love to be in New York for the foreseeable future. And it's like my career goal was not to take over the businesses from my family. It was to do my own thing. And that thing has thus far been a lot of like slash venture capital stuff in the kind of coastal cities.
Now you live in New York City, you moved away from Georgia. Part of the going to good schools, getting those stamps there is like your network,
Yeah.
right? I don't know, was that ever talked about by your parents as being one of the thing, or maybe unspoken, or
The transparent answer is probably, but I was also just pretty keenly aware that like going to a good, like I went to business school at Columbia, like growing up in South Georgia and then playing football at Mercer University in Georgia. Most of my peers for the first 22 years of my life were largely people from Georgia or the Southeast more broadly. I knew going to like a good school, you're going to get a lot more exposure to people from both all over the country and all over the world. And also like it'll be a lot of strivers, which I use that word as a positive, but like people like going after, like trying to level up in their careers that are trying to do a lot of different stuff. So I was very aware when I was applying to business schools that it would be like a massive leverage point for me. The main reason I was going was not to build a network, but I was quite aware that I would have a strong network as a consequence of that decision. And that definitely weighed into it.
Yeah, so maybe if you could think back at that inflection point, right? It seemed like there was a kind of a pivot where you saw a life in the Southeast and then maybe it changed. Where did that come from?
The actual answer is I never felt like I was at home in the Southeast, and I very aggressively wanted more for my life. And I don't know how else to put it other than I felt like I was underachieving a lot of the things I could experience if I limited myself to staying in Georgia my whole life. And I viewed business school, especially business school in New York, as an off-ramp to go do much more interesting stuff and put myself in more interesting circles. It very much came down to I want to have a more interesting life than what I'm probably going to if I graduate and live in Atlanta and never leave. And I don't know what that more interesting thing will be, but I want to go after it.
Yeah, but your sister, which is the best control test we have here, did she stay in the Southeast or did she
Yeah, like
travel?
she went to the University of Georgia. She works in marketing in Birmingham now. But she also loves living in the South. Like we are
Yeah,
just two totally different people. She loves being near the family, living in the South. She has zero desire to live in New York City. Loves
yeah,
to visit, wouldn't want to live here. Me, I turned 25 and was just ready to get out of Georgia, and that's when I moved to New York.
yeah. Because I guess I'm trying to dig into maybe you can recall a certain instance that happened, or maybe at somewhat you were exposed to it, right? Either through a magazine, that's dumb, but maybe you hung out with some people at a party that were going there, and you're like, that's where's the inception of the idea, right? Because what we're trying to do here is a lot of these wealthy parents that are listening. I hear a lot of them too. The kids, to no fault of the parents, they just haven't had the exposure quite yet to
So
something.
it, so
And
the thing for me was like I was not aware enough as a middle schooler or high schooler of what the call career trajectory differences are if you go to a Yale or Columbia or Princeton or even a Duke, UNC or Michigan versus most schools in the Southeast. We'll exclude Vanderbilt, Georgia Tech. But there's a full subset of career opportunities where Goldman Sachs recruits kids from Princeton. They don't know where Mercer University is, right? And as a high schooler, the thing I cared, like I was the valedictorian in my high school class. I was a smart kid, but the only thing I really cared about was playing football in college. And I was like hyper optimizing for that. And then it was around my sophomore year of college where I was like really starting to think about what did I want to do with my career? And the thing I wanted to do was make a lot of money. Where do you do that? If you just Google, I do remember as like I was probably 19 or 20 Googling highest income jobs for new grads, investment banking
yeah,
in New
the
York.
companies, right? I mean, that
Yeah,
was
you
where,
you see the Goldman, the McKinsey, the JP Morgan, whatever, and then you also realize those jobs. I tried to do the online application for some of those internships, or even for some of the banking offices, like Bank of America, big office in Charlotte. Didn't even get a message back because like it was my first experience of you're not at a target school, therefore these jobs aren't open to you. And I was like, dude, I totally screwed this up on college choice. And then so to me, the workaround was like, okay, I should probably go to grad school and it should either be business school or law school. And my dad hated being a lawyer and he never discouraged me from doing it, but I heard so much negative talk about it from him that I was just like, I'm never going to practice law. So I kind of left business school. And hilariously, because I was playing football in undergrad, you can graduate transfer where if you have eligibility left after you've taken enough classes to graduate, you can play your extra 1 or 2 seasons at another school. I wanted to graduate transfer and play football at Yale for my last year of eligibility because they had an MBA program where you start right out of college and then you work a couple of years and then you come back and finish. It seemed like a good idea. And then, like the Ivy League, they don't let graduate students play sports. It's just like a league specific fluke. It's because they don't want somebody starting Yale Law School or Yale Business School and then dropping out and tanking their graduation rates,
yeah.
which is, I get. But from doing that, it put me down the like MBA recruitment pipeline. And I saw that 7 of the top 10 MBA programs offer deferred enrollment options where you basically take the GMAT, apply to business school your senior year of college, and if you get in, you work a few years and go to business school. So to me, it was like my golden ticket out of South Georgia inertia and into broader career set, basically.
So maybe going back to your, sorry, we're skipping around a lot, but going back
No,
to your
you're good.
parents, a lot of things you hear about second, third generation families is, especially before the kid comes back and takes over the estate or the company, you get promoted twice in other companies, typically
Yep.
Fortune 500, not some yo-yo
Yep.
company out there.
Yep.
Or what you did, you got a high degree or MBA from any school, but a high degree from one of those. Obviously, Columbia fits that category.
Yep.
Anything similar that you've heard that is best practices you've heard from your buddies on that their parents put them through? like that?
Are you speaking specifically about people that are coming back to take over the family business, or just people whose families push them to graduate school in general?
Families are pushing them, but then they got substantial monies coming back that they're going to take over,
Yeah, I
whether
mean,
that's a
I
business or not.
so hilariously, I have a lot of international friends from business school where out of my main friend group, it's Guatemalan, Indian, Argentinian, whatever. And Guatemalan guy, buddy named Marcos. His family runs a massive mattress firm business in Guatemala. And I think he was in consulting pre-business school, but the whole thing was like, go work somewhere, get experience, get your MBA. He did another job for 1 year out of business school with a tech startup. But the game was always going to be like, he had this foundation for a massive business in Central America. And it was, if you want to go back and run it, do it. And I think for him, it was like a family push to go out and get educated in America and then also experience building a career there. But once you have grown into yourself and become a man, like you'll be in a position to come back and run this, right? So it's like this is not the place to train you up to be the manager, be the face of the company, whatever. But like you have all the like social ties here already. So get the degree, get trained, be the person who has the like shiny Ivy League degree. And then when you come back to run this business, people will take you more seriously because you have the right pedigree. It's almost like pedigree laundering, where you're taking pedigree from here and then applying it to your business here to then scale that to the next level. And like that's a like relatively common thing, particularly for international students or students from call it like tier two, tier three cities, smaller towns. Like it would be the same if I went back and took over the family businesses. Not really my plan, but if I did, it's like Ivy League educated kid is now running like all our stores in the Southeast, right? So I think a big
Yeah, but
part,
for XYZ company, everybody
correct,
knows, and he
correct,
was this title up, as opposed to
correct.
just coming back and nepotism. Come
Yeah,
on, right here.
yeah,
So yeah, I guess why we wanted you on to be a guest on the podcast. You're obviously a writer, right? You wrote the book Young Money, but I think you do a good job articulating your ideas, and you're a guinea pig through this, right? Back in that time, what could you tell us about the families who did not grow up with very much wealth? Maybe the parents, like my parents went to grad school,
yep,
doctorate, but they didn't have millions, right? Like that
yeah.
kind of pedigree. What do you think that they were doing wrong, or if maybe right, or because you're in the middle too, right? Like you're seeing these super wealthy people, and then people that
Yeah,
just
it's funny. Like I put myself in the like if you compare my upbringing to median family from South Georgia, I grew up very well off. Like I got a truck when I turned 16. We had a big house in South Georgia. I had a football scholarship in undergrad, but in like business school, my tuition was paid for. But then on the flip side, compared to a lot of my friends from New York or who I met in business school, I would be dirt poor because they're billionaires or 100 millionaires. Like, for example, like my family covered my tuition, but they did not pay my rent or pay my cost of living, right? They're like, we'll pay your tuition bills, but figure out how to pay for your apartment. I was working for a media startup at the time. They're like, we're not going to pay for your trips in business school. Like, business school is like infamous for ski trips and yada yada yada. Like my dad wasn't gonna bankroll that. He's like, I'm paying for your education, that's it. So I was like you could say rich for South Georgia and then poor for call it Manhattan elite. So I've seen the full spectrum of the like human socioeconomic ladder. And in business school, especially, there was like the kids who grew up poor. They were on like hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loans. There were the like billionaire grandchildren who never had to work if they didn't want to, and then everybody else in the middle. And I think there's two massive differentiators between kind of the like multi-generation haves and have-nots. The first is that like people who grew up in families with money kind of know how the money game works. There is a certain subset of career paths, networks to tap into, opportunities to go after, where if you play the game right, you'll make very high six figures to low seven figures at a certain point in your career, like in your 30s. And all you have to do is just not screw up. But you have to know what that game is, and it's a little bit exclusive. You need to know from middle school or high school which colleges to optimize for, which internships to optimize for. Once you go in the investment banking or consulting route, like how to play that to get the next promotion, or do you jump to a private equity job, or do you go back to business school? There's just this whole internal knowledge that if you're from that world, you just know that's what you're supposed to do. And if you're not, you don't. And the other thing is that like I noticed this especially in business school. If you are from the poor family and you manage to get in the good grad school, you have to go after the banking job or the consulting job because you need to take You need to take the guaranteed relatively high salary to pay back your student loans. You can't go try the startup. You can't join the tech startup. You can't start a business because you will owe $150,000 that you have to pay back, and your family's not going to be able to cover that for you. You just can't really deviate versus the kids who grew up with some money. Maybe they did the banking thing initially, but if they're 26, 27 and want to try something new and they have a $10 million plus nest egg, right? They can do whatever they want. They
Yeah,
have
you're
this,
going for
yeah,
the fame
like,
and glory.
which to be clear, I actually think if you grow up rich, the right thing to do is probably take an entrepreneurial shot at some point because you are the most well positioned to do so. And if it doesn't work, you have a safety net to fall back on. So it's almost like first generation wealth has to secure the lowest risk bag that they can, but then their offspring or next generation offspring should be the ones that take the bigger swing because what's the point of having the money if you can't live your life with a little bit of agency, right? Having money, both you're much more likely to know how to go down the money path, and you're also just free to take much more ambitious shots because you don't have to worry about, you don't have to have a scarcity mindset. Again, New York and then business school in New York as a microcosm of that is just a really fascinating experiment of the human socioeconomic ladder because everybody's hanging out with everybody. Maybe I'm the like median educated New Yorker on income, family, net worth, where I'm seeing people way above me and way below me, and we're all at the same bars, at the same restaurants, hanging out with the same people. It's just wild.
Yeah, yeah. Going back to, I always had this analogy of the difference between rich kids and poor kids from an entrepreneur standpoint is the rich kids just got more quarters to throw into the game and get lucky.
100%. And it's if you come from the right network, guess what? If you want to raise venture capital or just friends and family money, you'll be able to find $5 million for your company. If you're a poor kid who's not networked, you don't have access to capital. Maybe you can get an SBA loan, and that's about it. I don't know. Like Bill Gates' daughter raised 30 million for her startup. I'm sure she's working hard, but it's also much easier to raise money when people know you, right? Like you're just playing with a massive competitive advantage on the like financing side.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just a different game. It's an easier battle when you have resources.
What about a thought of like in terms of I guess we call them the poor kids, even though they're not really poor, right? But in comparison to the others, they're just a little bit more living paycheck to paycheck, or I guess in a way. But are those students more elite in as they progress through careers? Are they like God-given talent in terms of you did sports, right? Kind of that
Yeah.
idea, as opposed to yeah, these guys are great and they're trying hard and everything, but they took the opportunities and did well with it. But
But my take on this is let's take Columbia for an example. If somebody who grew up in like rural Utah or like middle of nowhere North Carolina that ended up at Columbia Business School is massively outperforming their like baseline life scenario by getting there, where they had to figure out how to do it on their own. They probably didn't have parents pushing them to do it. It was probably a lot more intrinsic motivation versus if you grew up in the Upper East Side and went to like private school and say you went to Wharton undergrad and you end up at Columbia Business School, you're just like doing the status quo of what you were supposed to do. Or like honestly, business school is very big for people changing careers. You might actually be like, you may have messed up along the way from what your path should have been. Like, should you have been on a path where you didn't need business school? Well, like, why are you doing the redo now? So I don't know. I like if you're in a like largely elite institution, the people who are not from elite pedigree that make it, I do think are more impressive in that you know that they didn't really get any help getting there. And it's not that everybody from the call it New York Silicon Valley bubble had a leg up, but some did, and you don't know. Like you know that they probably had access to more resources, all things equal. So like I'm a South Georgia kid. I always like meeting other people who are like not from like the bubble metropolises.
yeah, I mean, like that character that has beat the odds and obviously a special character, they're different. Does that gain any clout in this whole social hierarchy? Do people know that this dude's different, right?
So it depends. It's like there's an entire game of like people tend to hang out with their like undergrad friends or like people tend to hang out with their crews where I don't know, like in business school, like my friend group is from all over the place, both geographically, undergrad, whatever. And I'm now largely friends with like just my friend group that I made in business school, and that's true for a lot of people. But in like the New York scene in general, it's like people tend to hang out with people who were like working with them at their first company, went to undergrad with them. went to business school or law school or medical school or whatever with them. And if you move up for grad school, it like resets everybody. We're all in the same bubble again, and we're gonna reset our station. But if you just moved to New York for work and you were the kid who like didn't go to the target school, I do think it takes a year or so to really break in because people are so used to clinging to their prior social groups, right? Like kids who went to Yale undergrad are going to hang out with the Yale kids. So if you're the one kid who went to the like non-target school who ends up there, you're going to have less of your friends who ended up in New York. And it's like, I do think people tend to find it impressive, but I do think you were a bit of a social outsider initially trying to break into elitism.
You made a great point. I never really thought of that. The high achieving person moving up, they're going to take the cop out job. I guess maybe not the cop out jobs, but just the more sure things, right? As opposed
What
to
percent? Like there's a couple of things going on though. The disadvantage of being the person who grew up super wealthy is like I mentioned this in my book, but I write a lot about status and how status pressures drive so many of our decisions. If you grow up really wealthy, say your family has $100 million or whatever, right? Like the thing that you cannot do is put yourself in a position to fall out of the social and socioeconomic hierarchy that you were born into, where there's only a few jobs that you can do that actually fit what you're supposed to do. And it's kind of the finance, law, consulting, medicine, or you can take the entrepreneurial route, but it has to work, right? If you go try a startup and it fails, it's like, even if nobody else actually thinks this, you're gonna have the social pressure of not wanting to be the outcast, feeling like your peers are getting ahead of you. Versus if you're from Wichita, Kansas, and you end up in New York, the your base case reality is just so much lower from an earnings standpoint than most of the people you're going to be around in New York. Your ability to enjoy that experience is infinitely higher. I say this as a kid from South Georgia because I'm not really supposed to be here. I felt like most of my 20s has just been like a very fun call option because I'm just doing a bunch of stuff that I wasn't really supposed to do versus take a version of me that grew up in the Upper West Side and went to Penn undergrad. Like I would probably be so stressed right now that I'm not doing enough, despite by like any objective measure having a really good life because your comparison or norm or like how much money I'm supposed to be making, what I'm supposed to be doing is so just set in stone by like your upbringing.
yeah. And maybe if you can talk a little bit more about that, because it's like, I know we don't want to make excuses for the rich kids, but if you think about it, like you're saying, it leads to depression, drug use, and
It's not even making excuses. I think it's like a huge, I think that one of the biggest problems for like wealthy families today is there's so much pressure on like high net worth kids to be superstars. It's a little bit morbid, but like Palo Alto high schools have 2 to 3x the suicide rate of like high schools, like the median high school in America. And it's because there's this hyper competitive just pressure to, you have to have straight A's. You need to be a good athlete. You probably need to be competing in like a math Olympiad. You like have to play water polo. Like that, you should probably play the violin or the trombone or the guitar. And if you aren't good at any of those things, guess what? Somebody else in your class can do all of them. And it's like when again, like it's and again, this like it's one of those things that you don't recognize it until you actually see it. But the everybody again, like everybody's expectations for their life are for the most part set on the reality they grew up in. So when you grow up around wealthy, successful, just 1% of the 1% winners, you feel like if you don't maintain that level of like competency and success, that you're a failure. Versus if you, I don't know, if you grow up in the hood, in like the bad part of Atlanta, and you just get out and like graduate college and have a good career, like you're the superstar. Which again, that's arguably a harder thing to do to escape poverty and all of the like just like negative environmental factors that can pull you back in. But objectively, the level of success you have to hit to feel like a winner is way lower than if you already start at the top. Like the what I'm gonna totally mess up the phrase, but the whole thing about like satisfaction or happiness or joy is just the gap between expectations and reality. And if your expectations are really low, it's like pretty easy to set yourself up to have a good life. If your expectations are sky high, you have to sprint constantly to maintain that. And you're competing against everybody else's expectations are sky high. So I'm like one of few people who like would say that I a lot of times feel bad for like really stressed out rich kids because there's like this internal pressure that also nobody else feels sorry for them because you're rich. Like you're supposed to have it all together. So I don't know. Like I think that it doesn't shock me that there's like spiking anxiety, depression, call it restlessness with like second and third generation wealthy kids. Because if your parents busted their ass to go from nothing to making something of themselves, how do you surpass that? Like
Yeah.
it's like a really tough situation.
I think the quote that comes to mind is Charlie Munger, right? The secret to life is low expectations.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I guess maybe like speaking from your own experiences, which if you had to put yourself on which side of that equation, where do you think you're operating from?
I don't know. It's funny, like expectations change. For example, when I first moved to New York, I probably had this idea of if I make 150 grand a year for the rest of my life, that's like a great setup. I live in New York City and like I pay 4,000 something dollars in rent for a studio apartment. Guess what? I want to make a lot more money. I'm going to a wedding in the Hamptons for some friends from business school, like super wealthy families. It's going to be sick. There's a lot of money there. So the more time you spend in an environment, you start to adopt those norms as like the thing you want to get. We're all mimetic creatures that like copy what we see at the end of the day. So I'm pretty self-aware of expectation skew and try to keep myself grounded, but I'm not going to act like I don't feel the pull the longer I'm in New York or San Francisco. I'm totally a victim of it too, right? So like I would say a few years ago, I was much more on the like low expectations, high enjoyment. And now both lines are still creeping up. Where like expectations are rising. I would say my fulfillment from life is also increasing, but like I have put more pressure on myself over the last 2 or 3 years than maybe I did 6 years ago. And I think that it's just a consequence of living in Manhattan in my 20s.
Yeah, but it doesn't sound like much of this is coming from your parents
No,
then.
it's
Yeah.
my look. My parents pushed me to work hard on whatever I do, and they pushed me to get a good education. But I wanted to play football in college. My dad had played football in college. He never pushed me to do that. He like encouraged me when I wanted to, but he never pushed me. After my first job, I worked in corporate finance for about a year and a half. I hated it. For context, like I graduated college right when the pandemic hit. Like January 2020 is when I started my first big boy job, corporate finance at UPS in Atlanta. Guess what? We were in the office 3 days and then we went remote indefinitely because of COVID. Corporate finance is not a very fun job, and it's certainly not fun when you're doing it remote on Zoom calls and Excel and PowerPoint. And anyway, I just called my dad. I was like, I think I'm going to quit my job and go backpack Europe and Latin America for a year. And he said, cool. I'm not going to pay for it, but if you can make the numbers work and you want to do that, he's like, you still should go to business school, but if you want to do that for a year, go have fun. So my family's always been big on live your life how you want, but you're responsible for your own life's outcomes, and I think that's like a pretty healthy outlook to have.
Yeah, and part of your book, Young Money, kind of talk a lot about like living intentionally, right, rather than reactively. And, like, how does that play out? Like specific examples on how you're kind of doing day to day these days.
The thing that I think a lot of people miss is that life is incredibly stage specific. There are things that like you will enjoy a lot when you're in your early 20s that you would absolutely hate in your mid 30s. Going back to the travel thing, backpacking Europe and South America when you're 24 is freaking awesome. You're staying in a hostel, you're living on like dirt cheap, you're eating like euros and sandwiches and drinking cheap beer every night. You have like 10 roommates. It's great. I'm 29 now. I would hate that. I imagine at 35, I would really hate that. It would just sound miserable. But the thing for me when I was 24 was like, there's this really fun trip I want to do. I want to go on it right now. I want this like reckless adventure. And it's a trip that I wouldn't enjoy later, but I would enjoy the memory of having done it when I was younger. So I did that. When it comes to living intentionally, I think it's really like having an incredible level of self-awareness of like what life stage you're in, what matters to you then, and what life stages will you be in later, and how should you set yourself up to get enjoyment out of those. So it's this constant balance of like, what experiences should I exploit right now and go after right now because the window of opportunity to enjoy those is really short, but also how do I keep setting myself up so future me can continue to get what they want out of life. And as a general rule, it costs way less money to enjoy stuff when you're younger, and it costs more money when you're older. You are going to want a nicer home when you have kids. Vacations are probably going to cost more. You want to take better flights when you're traveling with your family. There's just so many more things. You got to pay for your kids to go to school, all this stuff. When you're like 24, just nothing. It's you can have fun for a low amount of money. So in my life, I was very conscious of never pass up on an experience that might cost a little bit of money in my 20s because I'm only going to be in my 20s for so long and will probably be glad that I said yes to whatever that thing is. A party, a trip, just go into a new city on a whim, whatever. But I also wanted to put myself on a career. I was not worried about making a lot of money in my 20s, but I was very worried about putting myself on a career path to as I hit my late 20s and got into my 30s, my income would start going like this because I knew life was going to get more expensive. So,
How do you
yeah,
balance that? So if a parent is listening right now and their kid's a screw off and they want to go backpacking now when they're 27 and they haven't really done anything, right? What would you tell that parent? Because it seemed like you live life intentionally, but you are always on that trajectory, right? You always kept yourself there. But
the real answer is don't pay for it. I was like, my dad was like, there were two things. One, I knew I was going to business school in a year, which meant I would have quit my job anyway. And two, I was going to pay for it. And if I ran out of money, I was going to have to come home and find another job before business school. So just don't enable bad behavior. I think it's totally fine for someone to want to take a gap year and go learn pottery in Italy, or I don't know, go teach English in Ecuador, or just backpack the world for a little bit. But I don't think that parents should bankroll things that aren't like pushing your child in a direction of either like economic success or family stability, meaning that paying for education, good. If you're at a spot where your kids are getting married and having kids and you want to help with the down payment on a home, I think that's totally reasonable. I think the worst thing you can do is just save all your money until you're dead and leave it in your will because if you die in your 80s and your kids are in their 50s, they probably don't need your money anymore. But when they're 32 and having their first kid and buying their first home, you could probably help out a lot with helping them put a down payment on a house. So I think that's fine. I think paying for education is fine. Paying for early apartment costs when they're just moving to a city and haven't started saving money yet, I think is reasonable. But I don't think you should pay for your kid to go find themselves in Budapest or Prague or whatever, right? The general rule is pay for things that enable them to progress in life, but don't pay for things that enable them to just like coast, right?
yeah,
And again, at the end of the day, it's the kid is deadbeat, but they've found some weird drop shipping business where they're making money. They're an adult and they can make that decision, but you do not have to give them money to enable them to not get their career together, right? I don't know. I also think that fun, crazy stuff like backpacking Europe or whatever is only fun if it contrasts the thing that you're supposed to be doing, where it's like, this is a short-term thing that's high enjoyment, and then I'm going to get back on the track of career. It makes it more fun because you know that there's like an end point, right? Adventure without an end date is just hedonism at the end of the day. I think it's like a pretty important framing to keep on any sort of trip or crazy life experience or whatever. Do it, but know that it's temporary.
yeah. I guess maybe I'm showing my age here. That's why they give the kids in real world jobs so that
Yep.
they did their job and they partied harder. If not, they'd
Yep.
just be a boring life of video games and hedonism in the
A hundred
house, I
percent.
guess.
100%.
So I guess with the last topic as we wrap up here, you kind of mentioned you guys are kind of getting that age where people are getting married, maybe not kids yet, right? Because people it's a little bit later these days, but
Yep.
maybe talk to us a little bit about the parents, they got their kids, they're dating, they're getting married, and maybe it's not like interracial marriages because that's kind of old, but it's more like inter socioeconomic marriages, right? Give me the scoops on that if you're
So,
seeing.
for context, as the single 29-year-old Caucasian male in New York, I guess I'm the perfect guy to speak to marriages and relationships. No, it's funny. I hadn't really thought about like you stuff about call it like racial gap relationships. Sure, you have like black guy marries white girl or like Asian woman white male, like all this stuff. Cool. All that to your point is like kind of normalized at this point, but I do think the status of socioeconomic gap relationships are like really tough because people have totally different context on what's normal. For example, like if I grew up in a really wealthy family where we owned a ski house in Aspen and we summered in Europe, and then I'm marrying somebody who grew up on food stamps in Louisiana, you just have two totally different perspectives on the world. And I think it can be really tough to reconcile that for both parties. It's not that either person is right or wrong, but I do think when you have two people coming from two totally different worlds, unless they've both made like pretty intentional efforts to understand where the other person's coming from and be understanding, I just think it's hard. Like
Yeah, like marriages are hard enough. Why make it so different, right? And hard.
Yeah.
Like,
Do you really want to, like, I actually think that type of gap is probably much tougher than like any version of like racial, political, religious difference. Like money problems are bigger cause for divorce than infidelity, right? It's the like money issues are the number one driving cause of divorce. And if you take people whose like relationship with money are diametrically opposed, where one person has never known what life is like without money and another person has never had money, you're going to end up where the person who grew up poor is going to feel like you need to hoard resources all the time and or they'll start blowing cash because they don't know how to handle it. So it's obviously not true with everybody, but I do think it's tough. And then there's a reason that like people tend to marry people that like they either went to college with, went to grad school with, or they like met at work, which dating apps are now changing that a little bit. But like historically, that's how it's been. And like you tend to spend time in person with people who are like similar to you. That those similarities remove a lot of risk factors, right? So like I don't really have an answer for is there a way to solve it or figure it out. I just think that it's a massive friction point. And frankly, as like online dating becomes more and more of a thing, you're gonna have more touch points where people go out with people because they're physically attracted to each other, but they actually have totally different like perspectives on the world. And we're like early in this experimentation of as people continue to meet up off of like what is 6 photos and a few sentences, and you don't really know that much about the person's context. Like online dating is the cause of more relationships than any other medium now. So how does that play out over the next 15 years? I don't know, is the short answer, but it's like a pretty fascinating thing to think about.
yeah, yeah, pretty fascinating. I mean, it's just like a shotgun of these experiments,
Totally.
that probably won't work out. Well,
Some will,
yeah,
some won't.
some will. Well, it's not though.
Yeah, probably.
But I guess how you seen, have you ever seen like economic levels mix and like there was like quarrel between what the parents wanted and things like that, or maybe
Not to my knowledge, but there is the thing that I have seen is like where you have somebody who is, they call it like self-made guy who grew up maybe like middle class, ends up in New York and is just like really serious about their career and crushes it. And then someone else who was born into like second or third generation of that and they start dating. The person born into it, like, just might not really understand the level of drive or grit the other party had to have get there because like they almost take if you're born into a thing where your whole life has always been at the like far right tail of like human experience, you take a lot of stuff for granted that other people had to climb several levels through to get.
but
I
that
think you
person knows, they knows what success looks like. They know what boat to get on. That's for
yeah.
sure.
Yeah, 100%. But
They're
it's
no
like
dummy.
when one person worked incredibly hard to get to a point that another person was born into, I just think it's almost like if someone's a native Spanish speaker and somebody is learning Spanish and they're 70% of the way there, you're usually on the same page, but sometimes stuff gets lost in translation. And I think that just adapting to the like higher class norms or understanding where they'll call it traditionally lower class person is coming from is just hard and it takes a lot of effort from both parties to make it work. It's not impossible, but it's a learning experience for everybody involved.
Yeah. What will be your input on this? Because a lot of my clients, they they're obviously very interested in money and finances, right? So they would probably be put in that category of the type A, grower, trying to crush it in the career or
Yeah.
business. But it's always like the spouse is comes from a similar background, but has a lot more scarcity with money. Maybe they I'm not saying they're homeless, but they're living on food stamps or paycheck, parents are paycheck to paycheck, and there's just a lot of scarcity with it. So you always have this thing where one person trying to pull the other up, yet they come from the same place in a way. But yeah, that's it. We see a lot, or at least I see a lot. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's interesting. So are you saying both spouses come from the same high net worth? Are you saying they both come from the same high net worth bubble, but one of them is way more scared about losing money than the other one, even though they both come from similar upbringings?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so now then my turn to ask you the question. Is it usually the guys are one way and the girls the other way? Is there a gender skew or is it pretty evenly split?
I'm not noticing any skew. Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
That's funny. At the end of the day, everybody's risk tolerance is different, right? I don't know. My guess would be guys tend to be more like risk seeking and risk on, and girls tend to be more like risk. I wouldn't even say scarcity mindset, but just risk averse about finances.
Yeah.
But
That's what I thought initially when I started to do this 10 years ago. But then
Yeah.
I started to realize the guys are actually a lot more ego based, right? I don't want to look stupid. I want to try something
Yeah.
different, look stupid from my buddies. Where the females seem to have a little bit more over encompassing feeling of, hey, this is what our family needs to do. Screw
Yeah.
what people think about me, right? So that's where I'm kind of like, I can't really see a skew either way
Yeah.
with this.
Yeah. That's interesting. Huh. I wouldn't have thought that, but that's cool.
Yeah, but I don't know. I tell people, look, I don't have the answers. Jack don't have the answers, but I think this awareness of this dynamic in the family is important to discuss.
Yeah.
But I guess that's what communication is for what it's worth.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, anything else you think we missed, or I want to give you the opportunity to give your book a shout out. I know we talked a lot about it is a world that a lot of people are interested in. I think you give a lot of good insights into it. Yeah, why don't you kind of tell us how they can learn more about your
Yeah.
content?
First of all, book is called Young Money, A Field Guide to Wealth and Purpose in Your 20s. I don't know if this episode's coming out before or after August 4th, but the book drops August 4th. So either pre-order or order your copy. Again, the whole thing I'm writing about is basically like how people fall in these status traps and just kind of waste year after year of their 20s, like chasing the wrong thing without taking a step back and thinking through how they want to spend their time and how to leverage their money to get there. So the book's obviously geared toward young people in their 20s. I think it's relevant to anybody thinking through just opportunity costs and the stage specificity of life. But I don't know, it's largely a reflection of the last 5 or 6 years of my life put in book form of like how does it feel to be like 24 and not enjoying your career or hitting your late 20s and feeling like you're at this inflection point where you need to get on the right train that matters a lot. And I just think a lot of young people today are dealing with identity loss, status and anxiety, and like all of this stuff. And the money is such a core part of that that I tried to, at a maximum, give people some thoughts that could be helpful, and at a minimum, show other young people that, hey, you're not crazy for having these thoughts and concerns. So the slight self promo is if that sounds relevant or interesting to you or someone you know, check out Young Money by me, Jack Rains. You can follow me on Twitter, LinkedIn, Substack. I've got a cowboy hat on in my profile pictures. So I respond to all emails, DMs.
I think it is an authentic experience share, that's for sure. And I think it's actually a large demographic out there, large
It
piece of
is.
the pie.
It is. I totally agree.
A lot of you guys have kids that are kind of grew up in this era. I've kind of somewhat aged out a little bit. I don't quite understand some things out there these days, but having understanding and empathy over other people's situations is important. And I also think it is important as an investor. If not, you just become out of touch, old person.
Yep.
Thanks for jumping on, Jack. Again, Young Money. If you guys like this, rate and review. And we will see you guys next time. Bye.
Sweet.
Let's talk about deals.
Sir, looks like you have yourself a junior partner.
You guys have heard my story. In 2015 and 16, I transitioned from a bunch of single family homes into syndications and private placements. I was single at the time and I was able to travel to all these rinky-dink conferences. A lot of times it's just out there to sell educational programs from these gurus to get guys who want to lead the deal and be a GP. Not the place for passive investors and accredited investors like how we have in our FOOM community, where we emphasize long-term relationships there. As I was making this journey, I had to kiss a lot of frogs, focus on investing with people with a track record of $1 billion of assets or greater. You get a lot of these guys who've maybe done a handful of deals and likely still working their day job, not the guy you want to be investing with. Unfortunately, what a lot of people will do outside of the FOOM is they'll go down their podcast feed and go on YouTube or Google, or what's worse is invest with people who came up on their Facebook feed and just paid an ad. As I always say, invest with people you trust and people in your community have invested with in the past. I got burned my very first time in a deal in 2012. I just didn't have somebody that I knew personally, an organic relationship that I had invested with in the past. Lesson learned, and I'm hopefully can share that knowledge along with a lot of other things with you guys here in the future. But you want to focus on semi-institutional operators over $1 billion of assets. But how do you find these types of people? These wannabe general partners that I call them, these extroverted people on social media. We saw in 2022 to 2023, a lot of these guys burnt out. There was a very well-known educator out in the space, not going to say the name, but I would have had a list of all their operators, and I checked it recently here in 2024, and about half of them are in business. Likely the other half went back to their day jobs because it just didn't work out. And those are the people that have had the podcasts, the YouTube channels, that if you don't have a community like ours, you're likely to step on those landmines. When I first started to invest, my first 15 turned out to be duds.
Too bad. You've already signed the deal.
1/5 of the time. And this is where I break down the numbers here. If you're investing 50 grand into each of these deals, 1 out of 5 deals times 50 grand, $250,000, 50 grand of that is at huge jeopardy. Just speaking for myself, that was my track record stepping on a landmine with an unsophisticated fake it till you make it operator when I first got started, before I built this robust network that I have today. Now, you guys can just invest with us as deal sponsors and operators. That's totally cool. But what the whole purpose of the FOOM is to empower you to invest with other people out there. For all I know, I may not want to be an operator or a deal sponsor forever. We talk about this in the FOOM is get to your magic number point, and maybe I haven't hit that yet, or maybe mine is just way too high and I need to stop while I'm ahead. Our goal for you guys is to hit that number and just relax and just invest in a bunch of T-bills. But if you're not to $4 or $5 million yet, you got to keep going. And unfortunately, you're going to have to take on a little bit risk. But what we're here for, and what the community that I've built for you in the FOOM, is to stack the odds in your favor. Not like little old Lane back in 2016, investing with a bunch of yahoos out there. The FOOM membership is definitely worth the price of admission. 1 out of 5 people you may be investing in out there might be questionable. And if you're thinking 50 grand increments out of 250, do the math for yourself. Maybe in a way it's like insurance. But again, deals aside, make sure you join the FOOM for the right reasons. Relationships. We've had some people in the past join because they just want to figure out who to invest with. And yeah, that'll happen organically. Join the FOOM to add value to each other and for the long-term relationship. Because we're just not another form out there, which, by the way, these internet forums where they talk about operators, in the back end, there's just a bunch of backhanded referral fees and marketing fees. I know because I see and I get pitched to be on those forums all the time. So that's unfortunately how this business works, which is why at the end of the day, you want to have real personal relationships with people. And also at the end of the day, relationships are the currency of the wealthy.